We have an exciting topic today and some great panelists to talk about energy policy in the 117th Congress. I will simply mention a couple of things. Well, first off, I'm Rick Thigpen, everyone, and it's great to be here today. On your screen, obviously, you have two boxes. There is the chat room, and we encourage everybody to introduce themselves and talk amongst each other as this goes on. We'd love to inspire some dialogue amongst you. And there's a Q&A box, which will be monitored by us, and you can ask questions as this program proceeds. And we encourage you to do that as well, because this give and take is very important, and having you all be a part of the conversation you're going to witness will do us all the world of good. So I will just start by saying that there's no one on this webinar that has not noticed that the world has changed. The national election results from 2020 were quite significant and perhaps a little controversial in some circles, but they have certainly ushered in a new era in Washington. Not only is the Biden administration replacing the Trump administration, but the Senate is now in the control, a very narrow control, but under the control of the Democrats, and the House of Representatives is also narrowly under the control of the Democrats. So politics will have a big impact and be an underlying current for all of our conversation, and none of us should forget the events of January 6th and how they will impact the ability of our Congress and our country to function. And I would be surprised if I didn't think that if I didn't find out that most AABE members are paying very close attention to what happened in Washington, and certainly saw the issue of equity and diversity, as well as election results, to be a very powerful driving force in the insurrection that happened at the Capitol. And the point is, what does all of this mean for for energy policy, for sustainability, for climate change, and for that issue of equity that so many of us care about? It's very clear that the new President Biden has talked about 4 crises that he's going to prioritize: the pandemic, the economic crisis that has followed the pandemic, the climate crisis, and the racial equity crisis. So really a very new day has dawned in Washington, without a doubt. We have already rejoined the Paris Climate Accords. The president has indicated that he's committed to an economy-wide net zero plan by 2050. And just today, the president is going to be signing executive orders on climate action that includes a pause on leasing federal lands for oil and gas exploration, directives to federal agencies to end fossil fuel subsidies, creating a task force to create a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, double energy production from offshore wind, and to take action from an equity lens, as well as, and last but not least, declaring climate a national security priority. So these are just table setters for what I think is a very interesting conversation. We have some outstanding panelists who I'm about to introduce to you. I will start as we were talking, in case my mother is listening somehow, ladies first, of course, and that is Katrina Metzler, the Executive Director is her title. She is Executive Director for Family, Adult, and Children First Council in Fairfield County, previously in Ohio. She is also held positions in Energy Policy Analyst, State Services Director, and Energy Services Director for the National Association of State Community Services Program. Prior to her work in Washington, she was employed by the state of Ohio, where she was a section supervisor for weatherization, managing one of the largest weatherization programs in the country. She was appointed to the State Energy Advisory Board in 2013 in the great state of Ohio, and she was also the Director of New Business Development at Pickaway County Community Action Agency. She is here today because she has a great knowledge of energy policy as well as the needs of low-income communities, and I ask all of you to give a virtual round of applause to Katrina Metzler. And I will ask you to speak in just one second, Katrina, after I introduce our other panelists, and that is Christopher Guth, who is Senior Vice President at the United States Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute. Prior to joining the Chamber, Christopher serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, where he developed the administration's nuclear energy policies. He is also a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Congressional Affairs at DOE and a Chief Representative of the administration during the drafting and debate of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And he also has served previously for Congressman Bob Barr and Representative Tim Murphy. I ask you all to give Christopher a warm round of applause. Having said that, I will start with Katrina, who I ask her to give us an opening statement. We'll follow by Christopher, and then we'll get into a dialogue, and everybody will have an opportunity to ask questions as you see fit. I'll turn it over to you, Katrina.
Thanks, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. This is the first of your policy sessions in of 2021, so that's an honor for me. I guess the first question when I participate in these types of panels that I want to know is, who are you and what are you doing here? So I will try to answer those questions very succinctly. Besides the background that Rick so kindly gave you, I am the Executive Director now for the National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition, or NEWAC. We are based in DuPont Circle, although I am coming to you live from my dining room, where I imagine many of you are also watching this presentation from your own homes. DC has been in a state of unrest for a while. I've been with NEWAC for the past 4 years, so this is my second transition. I transitioned from the Biden to the Trump administration at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. This is my second time going through a presidential transition, and I still feel like I have nothing to compare it to, because the times are unprecedented. So with so much going on, I know we're going to dive in deep on some of these issues, but primarily my organization is concerned with energy affordability. And the primary federal program that we advocate for here in Washington, D.C. is the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP. We have been very busy in the past 12 or 13 months working on those issues. As you can imagine, no one was expecting a pandemic. And when it hit, we were sort of trying to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. We knew that this was going to have a huge impact on the population that we serve, which are the most vulnerable. And any conditions that already existed were going to be exacerbated, and that has come to pass. What I don't think we expected was how long this was going to take, and also the depth of arrearages that we were going to see pile up during the crisis. Immediately, utilities stepped forward back in March, many of them, and issued either voluntary moratoriums, or because of their PUCs, they were forced into a moratorium. They weren't disconnecting people. And that provides an important health and safety protection for customers. What it doesn't provide is financial support. So as folks were in these moratoriums, bills continued to pile up. In some cases, in March, the winter moratorium that started in November of 2019 had not ended. And so when the COVID moratorium was issued, people rolled straight from a 3-month winter moratorium into a COVID moratorium. In many cases, that lasted all the way through summer, and now they're rolling into another winter moratorium. So conceivably, there are people out there, well, we know that there are people out there, households that have not paid a bill in over a year. So if you were asked to pay a year's worth of utility bills all at once, and 82% of LIHEAP customers make less than $20,000 a year, there is no payment plan that is going to be good enough for you to be able to do that. They can't afford their bills, paycheck. They're living paycheck to paycheck. So to try and tack on an additional amount is impractical. And that means that, now we have to get to work. We have to try and figure out ways that we can identify what the needs are, who those needs are affecting most profoundly, and who we can partner with in this new Congress, and what kind of partnerships we can form with the Biden administration in order to be heard, to make those voices heard. So this is probably the busiest time of the year for my organization. We are planning a briefing actually tomorrow with Hill staffers on LIHEAP. We have LIHEAP Action Day coming up next month, where we will have both customers who are served and the people who serve those customers. Normally they would be flying in and going directly to the Hill. This year it's going to be virtual, so we'll be meeting like we're meeting right now. But we're very busy with advocacy and figuring out who our new partners in Congress are, and if we can still depend on the partners that we have counted on all along, and whether or not we have the support that we need and the data that we need in a moving crisis to support those needs. I think with that, I'll pass it back to Rick.
Thank you very much, Katrina. And the National Energy and Utility Affordability Coalition, thank you for mentioning that, is obviously an important organization for AABE members to know and for us to talk about working together with AABE on what's coming. And we're going to talk about that more. Christopher, tell us what's on your mind, please.
Thanks, Rick. I'm glad to be back with you all again. The ostensible topic is the 117th Congress. But I think you have to sort of take a step back and look at sort of the universe in which this Congress is beginning. First and foremost, and we will get into this, the last Congress that just ended less than a month ago, in spite of the very partisan rancor, was one of the most productive Congresses in a long time, especially in the areas of energy, environment, and climate. We saw what I would argue is far and away the biggest and most impactful energy bill, climate bill, innovation bill Congress has ever passed at the very tail end. So where are we right now? I think the name of the game, as it has been for a very long time, is uncertainty. I mean, people love to sort of track the day by day, vote by vote actions, but a lot of those aren't all that they seem. And if you're in a business, which is where I look at it, because the Chamber of Commerce represents businesses from every possible sector, every size, every state. Sometimes there's small ball where things actually seem innocuous but are pretty important. But in the broader scheme of things, especially at the executive level, which is not necessarily what we're going to talk about today, but as part of the setting, is we see this constant pendulum shift from one extreme or from one area to another. We saw the end of the Bush administration, and we saw a very aggressive Obama agenda as it related to energy and climate. And then at the end of the Obama administration, you saw a very aggressive deregulatory effort on behalf of the President Trump. And so it shifted even further the other way. And now, as President Biden promised during his inaugural address, they're making very bold actions. They're not wasting any time. We've seen more executive orders in the first week from this administration than the last 4 administrations combined. Executive orders aren't all they cracked up to be. They don't have the same legal weight as an actual regulation, or more importantly, a law. And that's one of the reasons why we've argued that, at least within the climate space, it's crucial that Congress step into the mix here and pass a law and create regulatory certainty for the regulated community. We want to see a market-based approach to climate change, and we want to know how my members can invest over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. But when you have these shifts back and forth, it makes it nearly impossible to invest, and it makes it very inefficient. And unfortunately, those investments just don't have the same job creating or economic growth creating potential, because they're pulling punches. They just can't afford to make the real investments they want to, not knowing what's around the other corner. So we have a lot of challenges, a very divided Congress. If you look to the only analog, certainly since I've been alive, when we had a 50-50 Senate, was 2001. And ultimately, you had a very surprising and very, I guess you'll say, innovative power sharing agreement, where at the time, Majority Leader Lott came to Minority Leader Daschle and said, look, we both have 50-50. How about we split everything down the middle? We both have committees the same size. And because we're split down the middle, there's a good likelihood that some committees are going to deadlock on certain items. If that happens, either one of us, the majority leader or the minority leader, can bring it to the floor. I mean, that was very ecumenical and in some cases ostentatious on behalf of Leader Lott's position. And a lot of his members really raised an eyebrow at it. But what we saw with Vice President Cheney as the president of the Senate is one of the most successful first 6 months of any administration. You saw No Child Left Behind passed. You saw the Bush tax cuts passed. You saw appropriations passed in the first time in almost 6 years. And it didn't last very long because we had a party switch that sort of threw it all out of whack. But I think we're starting now with the same basic agreement. The question is are we cooking with gas once again? And I think the real question here is on the desk of President Biden, because President Bush, the first thing he did after he was inaugurated, he called Senator Ted Kennedy, arguably the most liberal senator at the time, and said, "Look, Ted, I want to work with you. We are both focused on education reform. Let's get that done." And that became No Child Left Behind. And that olive branch, even though his party controlled the Senate by the +1 vote of the vice president, um, it really set the tone for working together. And so certainly President Biden has a long history of bipartisanship. He has a long history of making deals in the US Senate. So those of us in the business community have high hopes. But I will tell you, the bold actions he's taken so far, in some areas, they're right where the business community is. Things like rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and the announcement he just made of holding a global climate summit on Earth Day. That's where the business community wants to be. We need not just the certainty from what our own government's doing, but we need the rules of the road around the world. And this is not a US problem. This is a global problem. A ton of CO2 that comes from outside of Beijing is just impactful as far as climate change is a ton of CO2 that comes out of Northern Virginia. So there's areas there where there's absolute overlap, but a lot of the things like pulling the permit for the Keystone Pipeline and laying off at least 1,000 people overnight for a project that the Obama administration said would actually reduce greenhouse gases. And then today's announcement, banning new oil and gas production on federal lands. If you don't live in the Gulf Coast or in the Western US, it probably seems very distant, but federal oil and gas production accounts for almost a quarter of all the oil and gas that we produce. If federal lands were their own country, they would be the 9th largest producer in the world. So it's not insignificant. And when you think about that much oil and gas being produced, it employs tens of thousands of people. And we're in the middle of very challenging economic times where, this point where we have about 11 million people who aren't employed that were employed this time last year. We can't afford to be giving pink slips right now when we need to be growing this job. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of challenges, but I think there's still definitely room to thread the needle in Congress, and I look forward to talking about that.
Yes, in fact, I can't pass that one up. Room to thread the needle in Congress. That sounds like a great conversation. All of the AABE members are certainly interested in hearing the voice of the business community. We have an extra special desire to talk about equity, but I'm going to leave that in the background for a second, Christopher, but I want you to hear it because it's on everybody's mind. Can we hope for some more equity in the future? For some of us, we watched what happened in Washington, and a lot of that was about anxiety about this word of equity. People don't want to see the change. They don't want to see people who you have in this panel get opportunities in the future. Now, having said that to you, you said something very interesting about regulatory certainty. I work in the utility business, and I'm quite familiar with the business person's need for regulatory certainty and the benefits to the business environment. And you talk about a market-based approach to climate. What do you think are the prospects in light of what we've just been through of bipartisan cooperation in Congress? And I'm going to ask you the same question, Katrina, and add a little equity to you as well. But they would love to hear how the business community views that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think they're very high. And I say this with anytime you start a new Congress, you generally have to start with a lot of optimism. Much like we were at the beginning of the last Congress, there's overwhelming bipartisan support for infrastructure. It's something that's very bipartisan. It's something that somebody as progressive as Bernie Sanders wants to see as much as somebody who's as conservative as Ted Cruz. Obviously, they differ on some of the details, but there's that will there. And that's one of the reasons why the Chamber, in conjunction or in partnership with the Bipartisan Policy Center, announced a Build by the 4th of July initiative. It's like, okay, Congress, okay, White House, you continually talk about this week after week. It was a joke during the Trump administration that every week was infrastructure week. Everyone talks about it, but never gets done. So we, as at this point, we're up to about, I think it's 250 different groups, and they span the gamut. We have environmental groups, we have road builder groups, we have labor groups, and certainly business groups, all saying this needs to happen. We're not always going to agree on the exact details, but Congress get it done. And so we're really putting our shoulder behind getting that done, because that's one of the areas where there's absolute obvious bipartisanship. And when I say infrastructure, I don't mean just roads and bridges, although that's critical here. I mean things like broadband. I mean 5G and rural broadband. I'm talking about sort of the energy transition, like companies like yours, Rick, are are neck deep in the middle of, being able to build things. And it's not just Congress passing a 5-year highway bill where they take all those gas taxes that they collected from all of us and then figure out where to build new roads. I mean, one of the most important parts of this is we need to change the permitting system. I mean, we're at a point where you can't really build anything in any sort of predictable time frame, and that's no way to get things done. Especially if you look at how much needs to get built out, whether it, like I said, surface transportation, wind, solar, pipelines. And so that's a critical part of it too. But I do think that given where we left the last Congress and where every single member of Congress and President Biden ran with infrastructure being one of their top 3 most important priorities, that let's take that low-hanging fruit and make it happen and show that we're not just going to use partisan rancor as an excuse to not get things done.
Interesting. Katrina, do you see similar optimism for bipartisanship, and do you think that bipartisanship on equity is achievable?
Well, this is an interesting question, and I probably would have answered it differently last week than I'm going to answer it today. That's how quickly things change in Washington, D.C. Prior to inauguration, I don't know. I mean, I was hearing that Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell had a good working relationship and had been buddies and, have worked together on legislation for many years in the Senate, and that there was a pretty good chance that the Biden administration would be able to work with the Senate regardless of the Georgia race. This was before the Georgia race was decided, when we were still not sure what was going to happen in that Georgia Senate race. Regardless, that Joe Biden was going to reach across the aisle and be able to work in a bipartisan fashion with both the House and the Senate, and that we were going to see legislation passed. And then Georgia happened. So let me give you a couple of different viewpoints on Georgia. There were those of us who really thought that it was going to be important for Georgia to go to the Democrats and for us to have a 50-50 Senate in order to get any important legislation passed that would help vulnerable communities, which is at my very heart and soul, I am a low-income advocate. There are others who really believed that if that state didn't remain in the hands of Republicans, we wouldn't have a split government, and that any decision that does come down from federal government is going to be hotly contested by a lot of really aggressive folks who feel unheard if the entire government is controlled by Democrats. So it was interesting to see how that played out. And now that we know that we have a 50-50 split in the Senate and Kamala Harris will be making any tie breaks, the most powerful people in the Senate are now the moderates, people like Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski and Lisa Collins, Susan Collins in Maine. These are the folks who will go back and forth between parties. They don't strictly vote along party lines, and suddenly their votes become very critical, because if Manchin in West Virginia decides to swing over and vote with Republicans, then that throws everything off. It's going to be an interesting Congress. I hope for bipartisanship. I don't expect bipartisanship. And one of the reasons why I said I'm answering this question differently today than I would have a week ago, Susan Collins is a Republican in the Senate from Maine. She's one of the champions of our program. Maine has one of the most expensive fuel prices in the country. They have a lot of fuel oil in that part of the country in the Northeast, and it's very expensive for people to fill those fuel tanks up. As someone who has previously been a propane customer, I know that coming up with $600 all at once, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, can be tough. So she's been a longtime supporter of our program, and immediately when the transition occurred, when we went to write a Dear Colleague letter in the Senate in support of LIHEAP, she opted not to sign on to our letter, which was, she's our champion, and our program has enjoyed bipartisan support for 40 years now. So to not have our champion on our side decide to support made us kind of think that the Republicans are circling the wagons. And what are we going to have to deal with? Like, what kind of partisanship are we going to have to deal with in this next Congress? How much are they going to protect? And right now it looks like they're protecting. So we have reached across the aisle, and we are hopeful that they will listen. We have built arguments for our program that support both Republican and Democratic agendas, because it is important that we not rely on one or the other to get our bills through Congress and fund these programs. I think it's going to be interesting to see how my program specifically, depending on who you talk to in Congress, you formulate a plan or you formulate an argument for them, for the program, based on what's important to them. So for the Democrats, the bill assistance part of what we do, where we actually, we pay utilities directly for people who are being disconnected or in threat of disconnect or who need reconnected to utility service, which, as you can imagine, is much more critical now that kids are going to school from home. And one person lost their job, the other person relies on electric and internet in order to get to work. So to avoid a downward spiral, connectivity is more important than ever. Those arguments are heard, those make an impact for some folks. For some other folks, especially on the Democratic side, what's impactful for them is hearing about weatherization, which is energy efficiency. And it's sort of the prevention arm of the program, where we go in and we can make houses more efficient so that they don't need the handout, which is how they refer to the bill assistance part of the program, as much, because their homes are more equipped to handle the heat and the cold and the temperature fluctuations. And Joe Biden did mention in one of his addresses that he wants to weatherize 2 million homes. And immediately I perked up, because I'm an old weatherization, that's my old stomping grounds back in Ohio. And that was really interesting to me, because right now it's really difficult to weatherize homes with the pandemic going on. It's really difficult to get into homes and have the proper PPE and protect your crews and also the families who you're visiting. So we're still working through all of those challenges, as well as a network. And then for others, still, it's an economy thing. When people's utility bills get paid, they have money to spend on other things. And it really does just protect communities. It strengthens communities, and it strengthens states, and eventually it strengthens the country. So just depending on who we're speaking to, we have to fashion an argument that'll work for them. I guess, yeah. In summary, I am hopeful for bipartisanship, but not really counting on it. I think we're going to struggle.
I heard a definite maybe out of you. Got it. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Christopher, you talked a little bit about banning oil and gas in the executive order and the future of fossil fuels, right? So we know the president we've rejoined the Paris Climate Accords. We know about the economy-wide net zero coming. We know what the scientists are telling us about climate change. I want to throw my favorite New Jersey truisms into this conversation for you. And this is a good one, by the way, which is very simply, the cheapest way is always the most expensive. And is that what we are talking about by continuing our use of fossil fuels? Sort of the cheapest way today will be the most expensive for our country tomorrow? Or do you see a way for us to sort of have a transition that makes sense and doesn't hurt business?
I don't think we have a choice. I mean, there's no way that we can have a transition that is not also focused on economic growth and maintaining the jobs that we have. It doesn't mean that some parts of the economy aren't going to switch jobs, but we see that all the time anyway as innovation happens. I had mentioned in the opening about the extensiveness of some of the legislation that happened at the end of last Congress. Well, the part that amongst many of them that really makes me excited is there was a bill that actually contained 45 other bills called the American Energy Act, and it was squarely focused on energy innovation. We're at a point now where business is really leaning in to reducing emissions. And you have the vast majority of electric utilities, which you know well, have made net zero commitments themselves. It didn't take a government to tell them to do it. They see not only the science, but also the path forward. The problem is we do not have the technology right now to get to net zero. And so there needs to be a much more fulsome effort, especially at the federal government, to develop those technologies. And that legislation laid the groundwork for the Department of Energy and the dozen plus national labs out there to really, really focus on the types of technologies we're going to need to continue to operate our economy and grow jobs and get to zero emissions. And you have to realize also I'm sorry.
Innovation, that innovation you're throwing in
Right,
here?
exactly. The same scientists who have been warning about climate change for decades have also um, come to the conclusion that not only we don't have the technologies, but there are three technologies that are really kind of there for development that we probably need all three, but we at least need one to not only get the U.S. to net zero, but also the rest of the world. And those three technologies are energy storage. I mean, because as we see the amount of wind and solar continue to grow across the US and around the rest of the world, the problem is it's intermittent. It's only as good as when the wind blows and the sun shines. So we need to have a way to capture those electrons and use them when they're needed and produce them when they may not be needed. But we don't have that yet. We have a storage problem. You can't just run this economy or any other economy on just renewables until we have that. Advanced nuclear, the sort of next generation of smaller modular reactors that can be brought not only in the United States in a much smaller way than the reactors we have operating now across the country, but also around the rest of the world. Not every community, not every country, not every region of every country has access to a organized grid the way that we take it for granted here. And then finally, carbon capture and sequestration. And this tends to be somewhat controversial amongst environmentalists, but less so every day. And that's because the scientists are clear. We need to be able to capture the greenhouse gas emissions that come from burning fossil fuels. And it's not because we need to keep the oil and gas and coal industry running. It's that the rest of the world continues to use more coal. We could decarbonize tomorrow and greenhouse gas emissions still increase. And we haven't solved anything yet. We need to bring that technology to bear so that the rest of the world that's going to continue to burn more coal can do it without emissions. And so some combination of those three are critically important. And that's one of the areas where we have absolute overlap with President Biden. He ran on a plan of spending almost $2 trillion on climate. That's where these monies need to go. It's not cheap to develop some of these things, and the government needs to take some of the risks some of the time. And that's just the rising tide that lifts all boats. If we get those technologies, we can continue to grow the economy. But you can't say right now that fossil fuels are going away, because if you don't have natural gas right now, then you don't have wind and solar. You need it to back them up. And hopefully in a very near future, because of the work that the very, very bipartisan work the last Congress did, we have President Biden's administration now, and presumably Secretary Granholm, who just had her hearing today, will have a multitude of new tools to really lean into developing and innovating technologies that not only we need in the US, but we need around the world to really address climate change.
So it's worth mentioning for those who don't know, Jennifer Granholm is the former governor of Michigan, who is the new Secretary of Energy. We also did mention Senator Manchin, Joe Manchin, who's the Democratic senator from West Virginia, who's now chair of the Senate Energy Committee. And okay, so Katrina, your turn. So fossil fuels are cheaper. I hear it in New Jersey as well. You want to make your bills affordable, let's focus on fossil fuels. So I got two questions. One, my New Jersey truism: isn't the cheapest way going to be the most expensive here by using fossil fuels to keep bills down? And then two is, do you expect Congress or the states to pass solar, wind, or policies to advance solar and wind generation as well as battery storage? And we didn't talk about energy efficiency, Christopher and Katrina. We'll get to that one also.
So this is the place where viewing this issue through the lens of equity really comes into play, I think, because there are definitely populations that are left behind in a green economy. Electrification has been talked about in even some cities, particularly on the West Coast, but it's spread over to the Northeast as well, are passing legislation where they want to go all electric and eliminate all natural gas homes in their jurisdictions by a certain date. And I think that in theory, these things make a lot of sense when you're looking at it through from a climate change angle. But from an equity perspective, you can't increase people's bills and not give them some additional assistance. So there has to be some way of doing that. The solar issue when it comes to the low-income communities is very misunderstood. I know that with net metering and things like that, in a lot of areas, the solution to the fact that solar is pretty expensive. So the affluent households buy solar and then sell it back to electric companies. And then, like transmission and delivery and other charges are being passed on to the rest of the customers who can't afford solar and who are at least able to afford those additional charges. So it's increasing bills for people who don't have the money to afford it. And I hope I'm not oversimplifying this issue. I probably am. So figuring out how to equitably distribute renewable energy in communities, and especially how to bring solar to low-income communities, is something that we're looking at in the future of LIHEAP. Eventually the bill support that we provide is going to be obsolete. Someday it's going to happen. And in what way can we move towards a future where we provide access for those who do not have access to some of those new technologies and make energy more affordable for them? Solar can work, but it's really funny because I just came from an energy list that I subscribed to, where we were having a massive debate on this, on the best way to implement low-income solar. And there are two schools of thought. A lot of folks think that community solar is really the only way to address low-income solar issues, because a lot of the folks who we serve with LIHEAP, for example, are on fixed incomes and are elderly and just don't have the resources to replace an inverter when it goes bad. They also may not be able to get up on their roof and change the angle of their solar panels all the time. And they may not be able to clear the debris off so that they're, so that they're getting the most out of that panel. But even beyond that, as someone who works with this population very closely, their roofs aren't going to support solar. It's like feeding caviar to someone who is starving. They have major structural issues with their homes, and you're going to put a solar panel on top of a roof that is leaking. It doesn't make any sense. There are underlying issues that have to be solved with that family first. So I'm glad that we're going to talk about energy efficiency, because that really should always come first. So community solar, where everyone benefits a little bit from a community solar program. A lot of low-income advocates really believe that that can work. Others firmly believe that customers should own those solar panels and should get the full benefit 100%, and that creates solar advocates, and that they should have that same privilege that is afforded to more affluent households to have those panels on their roof. There's also some environmental concerns about having fields of solar panels. So there are some environmentalists who really take exception with that and believe that rooftop solar is the way to go. This is an ongoing debate in our field, and I don't think we're going to solve it today. But primarily, from my perspective, what we need to do is lower bills for people. So if you're saying you're helping people, and that energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency are actually helping people, the way that translates for low-income families is my bill is less. So if you're doing anything that increases their bill, if you're charging them, if you're doing a tariff on their bill, if you are adding a lien to their property in order to pay for solar panels, any of those things, firmly against those things. Those are not low-income programs. They do not help people. They might get a solar panel on someone's roof and make a solar manufacturing company very pleased, but they do not help low-income people. So my primary concern is that they're actually helped by whatever program is developed and not ultimately hurt by it.
So a very, very hot potato there. So I think there's so much I could dive back in, because that balance between fossil fuels to keep bills low, but creating the problem even harder to deal with in the future. How do we do that well, and what should we expect the 117th Congress to do continues to be a question. But we did also talk about the need for this transition, I'll use that word, to do a couple of things. One is energy efficiency could be an answer to some of what your concerns were, Katrina, and that if you use less energy, even if your rate increases, your bill can continue to decrease, right? And that is obviously one of the gains to be pursued. And then there's the issue of clean energy jobs, the ability to create new jobs to help usher in a new economy. Nobody wants to usher in a recession in this transition. We want to, sort of keep moving forward. So maybe I jump on those two, Christopher. I know in New Jersey, we are doing an energy efficiency program that's going to create over 3,000 jobs in energy efficiency, right? So creating jobs is obviously a part of moving towards a clean energy economy. but how's the business community on clean energy jobs, and what are the prospects for the 117th Congress to adopt clean energy policies that will create jobs that the business community can support?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We're we're certainly looking to leadership in both houses and also the White House to kind of see where that fits in. I mean, obviously there's a lot of back and forth right now on the next COVID slash stimulus piece of legislation, and that fits in there. When you talk about the jobs, whether in New Jersey or elsewhere within the efficiency space, they tend to be weatherization, and that's great, except for, as Katrina pointed out earlier, it's really difficult to get in someone's house right now in the middle of a pandemic, and that's really what it requires. Putting new efficient windows or weather stripping in, fixing the vents and the HVAC. I mean, there's little things that every house, even brand new houses, can do to significantly reduce their energy production. And most of us, even if we consider ourselves handy, aren't capable of doing that. You need to have someone come in and do it. And that was a relatively successful program. The last time we went through a recession in 2009, massive amount of money went into weatherizing homes. And it's a win-win. You put people to work, you give homeowners or residents the benefit of using less energy without having to quote unquote conserve. They're going about their day using turn the lights on and the heat on just as often as they would, but they're just using less energy in the process of doing that. So there's definitely a huge component there. I mean, I think ultimately we need all jobs, and anytime you see transition, whether it's energy transition as we move from higher emitting to lower emitting, as you see technology like automated vehicles or the like coming in, you're going to see shifts in jobs. Right now, we can't afford to say no to any of them. And frankly, the people who pit one versus the other, it's counterproductive. I mean, there's plenty of space for all of them, even within the energy and environmental transition space. And I would be remiss if I didn't hit on environmental justice and equality of opportunity. I mean, it's a tremendous focus of the business community, the equality of opportunity, making sure that every American has access to being successful. I mean, that starts at long before kindergarten and building the schools. It means people who put their life savings into starting a business have the protections and the certainties from the government. They have incentives to invest and create jobs and employ people. I mean, that's good policy anytime, but it's especially good policy right now. And within the environmental justice context, that's obviously something that is a huge focus of President Biden. He announced today that every single agency is going to have an environmental justice office, and all the different agency decisions are going to be viewed through that lens. It's something the business community absolutely supports. There's definitely a history of communities of color and communities with lesser socioeconomic growth sometimes being on the short end of energy development, and that not only has been decreasing, but it needs to be a very tremendous focus of the regulators who are creating the rules, but also the businesses who invest there. But the flip side of that is a lot of the advocacy, especially within the energy transition space, is counterproductive. When you have people stopping pipelines that are going to bring clean natural gas to communities that have never had it before and force them to rely on old coal plants that have much higher emitting, that's not environmental justice. That's counterproductive. And I think we're finally at a point where we can have this broad conversation about how do we benefit those communities, not only by lowering the emissions in and around them, but also empowering them to create jobs themselves and be part of the business community.
Interesting. So let's talk to two Capitol Hill insiders a little bit and see what kind of observations you want to share with the people about 117th. As I mentioned, Senator Manchin from West Virginia is chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. Senator Carper from Delaware is chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Congressman Pallone from New Jersey is chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. We now have Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm from Michigan. And we have John Kerry, a special envoy for climate, and Gina McCarthy, a former EPA commissioner and White House climate advisor, as well as Susan Rice, a name some people may remember from the Obama administration and the Clinton administration, actually, as Domestic Policy Council director. Can we expect significant energy policies in the 117th Congress, you guys? you expect action? Do you expect kind of gridlock? And I'll start with you, Katrina.
I expect proposals. Looking down through even deeper into some of those career government positions that are appointed, it looks like President Biden is really focused with the progressives on energy. So I expect for there to be policy that is proposed, and we will see it hotly debated, especially in the Senate. I think the House will continue to be the place where legislation starts, and then it will end in the Senate. So it's going to be really critical that we win over some Republican support for those programs. I don't think they're going to be able to do it without some form of bipartisanship. They're going to have to negotiate. It's too close in the Senate for there not to be, which is probably a good thing overall for the country.
How about that, Christopher?
I think without getting too insider, it's hard to avoid this because it comes around every couple of years, but the budgetary process called reconciliation, you're going to hear a lot about it over the next 2 months. It changes the rules, and you only need 50 votes in the Senate. You only need a bare majority in the House, and it enables the possibility of different policies that would never get the necessary 60 votes through a regular course that a bill takes, because there's really no filibuster. And with 50 votes plus Vice President Harris's tie-breaking vote, there's quite a bit that is on the table. That the Democratic caucus is relatively splintered on some of these issues. There's folks who are on the far left, and there's folks, as you've mentioned, Chairman Manchin from West Virginia, who comes from a coal and a natural gas state, who would look like a Republican in most states. That they don't agree on a lot of things, but when it comes to some of the policies, we're going to see that. Things like electric vehicles and alternative vehicles, things like renewable energy, and within the context of infrastructure, more resilient infrastructure to make sure that as the climate changes, it's not impacted by storms and fires and tornadoes, so we have to rebuild it every 5 years. There's going to be areas where they can work with Republicans in that, but they've made it very clear they don't really care. They're going to get this done. This is their opportunity. The same way that when the Republicans were in control 4 years ago, they passed the Trump tax cuts. The Democrats are going to get a lot of their agenda done here. And then we move back to regular order where you need 60 votes. And that's where things become very difficult to see them threading the needle. And the one thing that we haven't really mentioned here is not only is the Senate tied 50-50 with, again, Vice President Harris casting the tie-breaking vote, but the House is the most narrow it's been in since I've been alive. And that matters a lot because as Speaker Pelosi has to corral her very expansive caucus with some very, very progressive members, and then also some very moderate members, especially those from energy producing areas, she can't count on everyone to go along with everything that they put forward. And so they can't move as freely, the House can't, as it did last time around. And as we've seen a lot of these House members go into the Biden administration, right now the margins getting narrower and narrower. And she just can't afford to lose a single Democrat if they're going to pass something. And so back to Katrina's point, the moderates are going to have an inordinate say about what comes there, what comes through in those bills. And frankly, they all have a wish list that's 2 miles long, and they're probably going to get the majority of it in order to secure their votes.
Interesting. I hear some very cautious words in terms of the level of bipartisan cooperation we're going to see here. So how about this topic that is certainly near and dear to my own world, Katrina? I think I'll start with you, and that is shut-off moratoriums. And Christopher, I obviously will talk to you about it. It matters to you all. We in the utility world, certainly, it has our full attention, that topic. We have, I'll speak for public service, the accounts receivable have ballooned during this time period of a shut-off moratorium. And now, of course, it has to end eventually. But then the question is, what happens with those bills? And you've already opened the door to the trouble it's going to cause. What do we expect in the 117th Congress on how to end the shut-off or how to handle the transition out of a shut-off moratorium?
Well, I know how I would like them to handle it. Right now, how I would like them to handle it. I think that right now 44 states have some form of a moratorium. imposed upon them. And then there are other voluntary moratoria going on as well. Yeah, exactly. Folks have stepped up from, for example, municipal utilities and co-op utilities. They're not beholden to PUC rules, and they didn't have to implement a moratorium. They went ahead and did one anyway because of health and safety reasons of protecting their customers. And they sent out the message that if you could afford to pay your bill, you should continue to do so. And that worked for some folks. But as you watch those unemployment numbers fluctuate from starting last spring all the way through to the fall, when you're living in crisis, you're going to deal with the thing that's in front of you. And so if your utilities aren't being disconnected this month and you don't have to pay that bill, then you use your resources to pay something else. And that's what we're seeing. So what we have seen is arrearages grow by almost $1 billion every 30 days since this began. And so at $20 to $32 billion by the end of last year, I know the rental folks are talking about this tsunami of back rent, but for housing stability, utilities are just as important. I don't even know if many of you know this, but you can have your kids taken away from you by Child Protective Services if you don't have utilities in your home in some states. That's child abuse. So it impacts family stability in more ways than one. And right now, the rental crisis is sucking up a lot of the oxygen in the room. So, and it's serious. So those are our families too. They're all struggling. But we're kind of struggling to be heard a little bit right now. At the end of last year in the omnibus, LIHEAP got nothing. However, they did pass a $25 billion rental and utility assistance fund. I'm not confident that a lot of that utility assistance money will actually be used for utilities because it's going to go to the housing folks. And so that means that utility assistance providers are going to have to ask for it, which AKA fight for it in order to get any of it to pay bills. If it didn't come directly to LIHEAP, it's not earmarked for utility assistance. There's so much crisis on the rental side. It's conceivable that they would say, you've got LIHEAP, we're going to use all of this for rental. So we're not counting on it. If we get any of that funding to help with utilities and some of the arrearages that we're seeing, it would be wonderful. But right now, our ask is $10 billion in supplemental funding for LIHEAP to address this crisis that we're seeing right now. And I feel kind of like, it's not even that might not be enough. We're also asking for things like an expansion of eligibility up to 80% of the state median income. In states like Connecticut, that's approaching, that is like 6 figures for a family of 4. So we're able to knock out arrearages for some folks who are not the poorest of the poor, but who maybe have a 3-bedroom apartment instead of a 2-bedroom apartment and a car payment, like these are people who are still struggling. They're just a few bucks over the income eligibility guidelines. And so we want to be able to knock out as many of those arrearages and help people get back on their feet. We think this is a temporary situation. We don't think that this is permanent. We're not going to need $10 billion every year for LIHEAP, but this year we need it. And the Biden administration has so far only proposed 5. So we will absolutely take that 5 and put it to work, helping people. But it's not enough for us to expand eligibility and do some of the things that we would like to do to see a real impact on those arrearages.
Okay. And Christopher, I got to warn you, we're running out of time, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one.
30 seconds. I mean, this is going to be a pretty significant fight over the next couple weeks as they negotiate the next installment of COVID relief. I think the part that gets lost here is that as people aren't paying, frankly, due to no fault of their own, because they don't have a job anymore, because their job doesn't exist, because there's quarantines, that cost generally gets socialized across the ratepayers who are paying. And that means inherently there's likely upward rate pressure. So I think it does come down to some sort of negotiation to get direct monies to each of these, to Kavia's point, to each of these sectors, so that it doesn't get divided up. Because my membership, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the utility space. It's happening in the cable and internet space. It's happening in the rental space. It's happening in the credit card space. It's even happening in the water and trash space. And it's just one of those areas where I think you're going to see the different sectors step up and say, look, the federal government needs to be directly involved here, and there needs to be a way to cover that bad debt in a very, very expeditious way. And then the flip side of that is, are we going to be able to stave off a federal moratorium so that all these different businesses are forced by the federal government to never have a moratorium and never be able to collect those outstanding debts from the people who might otherwise be able to pay?
Yeah, boy, is that hot potatoes. So we are running low on time. So I want to give you fair warning, both. I'm about to ask you for closing statements in just a minute, and both for Katrina, the National Energy and Utility Affordable Coalition strikes me as a partner in crime with AABE, and we are very eager to hear your thoughts and to have you talk to our members about how we should be working more closely together. These challenges that are coming are enormous. And what I heard from both of you is, frankly, that bipartisanship is going to be an obstacle to moving forward with thoughtful energy policy. And nobody said that, but that's kind of what I'm hearing in terms of our hope for the near term. And obviously for Christopher, for you, it's a little different with the Chamber of Commerce, but it's similarly important to AABE members for our voices to be heard by the business community, and for the business community to hear our voices. You exercise your enormous influence. So I'd love for both of you kind of to communicate to our AABE members your thoughts in terms of closing statements. And I want to thank both of you just more than I can put into words for giving us your time today. And I guess I will start with you again, Christopher, if I may.
Sure. AABE members are my members. There's a tremendous overlap when it comes to business within the AABE membership. And the goal right now is to grow the economy. We have a K-shaped recovery where some sectors are doing great and other sectors are doing horrible. Well, that's not good enough. I mean, we need to have all the sectors moving in the same direction. And we think that something like infrastructure is just that low-hanging fruit. It's not going to be easy, I promise you. But if everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction, it will be a huge shot in the arms of the economy and bring something that we all need. And that's modernized infrastructure, whether it's rural broadband or energy transition to renewables, or of course, roads and bridges. So within that space, cautiously optimistic, and look forward to continuing to work with AABE on that issue and everything else.
Thank you very much. Katrina?
I hope we can be strong partners in the future moving forward. There are stories and perspectives that I cannot and perhaps should not represent when I'm on the Hill. So despite the fact that we have a very small staff at NUAC, there are 2 of us. We have a very large and diverse board, and I tap them constantly to bring us their perspectives. Santil Jenkins from Thaw in Detroit, Rhonda Harper from Citizens Energy in Indianapolis. These are folks who their voice matters more than mine when we're talking about some of these conversations. And I think that AABE would fill a spot with our membership as well and provide a voice that we need to hear from on energy issues. Black families are more than twice as likely to be disconnected from energy as any other family. And that condition has been exacerbated by this pandemic. So we are seeing them struggle. And again, we need the right people in leadership positions to bring their voices to Congress and connect with what's happening at the grassroots level. I firmly believe that they just need information that we all have in order to do their jobs well. And it's up to us to make sure that they have that information. So yeah, I really hope we can partner moving forward and get some of those voices in places where they can be heard.
Outstanding. So on behalf of all of the AABE membership, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to share your thoughts and your expertise with us today. We found it enormously educational. We do look forward to working more closely together in the future. These challenges are quite significant of energy policy. They mean so much to our entire economy. They are key to our quality of life. They're key to climate change, and they are an important part of the whole equity conversation. And our ability to work together just increases the odds of public policy being made that reflects the concerns of our members. So I want to, on behalf of all the AABE members, I want to thank you all very much for your time and your thoughts today. And I wish everybody a great day, and I look forward to seeing you again on our next webinar. Thank you all.